Okay, hello to both of you and to our remaining participants who will also be looking at this video tomorrow or whenever they receive it. So we are going to be doing another session on judgments, prominent judgments today on the evolution and interpretation of prevention of sexual harassment law in India. Just to quickly recap, we had seen the Vishakha judgment, which laid down the Vishakha guidelines based on which in 2020 enacted the Women Act, Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act of 2013. There have been practical challenges with it, but the courts have played an active role in interpreting the law and defining the contours of certain definitions such as workplace, aggrieved women, and of course the definition of sexual harassment has undergone a wide interpretation throughout since 1997 till 2013 until date. So in our previous sessions, we had covered a couple of topics pertaining to workplace, the test of a reasonable woman, principles of natural justice, the criteria of appointment of an external member, what should a quorum be like, is there a limitation period in the absence of the internal committee being there in the organization when a complaint is filed, what are other principles of natural justice, apart from hearing a person out, there's also cross-examination, which is different from cross-questioning. Is there supposed to be fair and unbiased treatment in these proceedings? Another issue of principles of natural justice was the questionnaire format for cross-examination when people are not comfortable in coming forward in person during the depositions, and the ambit of sexual harassment and the proportionality of punishment. In our previous session, the last session which we had was on September 5th, we discussed the contravention of the law in appointment of external member where the person was on the panel of the bank itself. This was in the case of Punjab and Sindh Bank versus Durgesh Kuwar, and how that person who was on the panel of bank itself lost certain independence and impartiality aspect to this position and could not have been as an external member. Another thing that we saw, we revisited an old judgment that we had done in our first few sessions, Saurabh Kumar Malik versus the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, where we discussed how parallel proceedings, the departmental and the criminal proceedings, can continue simultaneously. And also we saw one of the cases where transfer was done of a person to as an interim measure to make sure that the sexual harassment complaint goes on smoothly in the organization. Today we will be taking up three more judgments, prominent ones, and one of them is quite talked about, where people believe that the sexual harassment inquiry doesn't need to be full-fledged. It can be even preliminary inquiry to understand whether the incident has even occurred or not. So this is a case of LS Cebu versus Air India Limited and others. This is a judgment of the Kerala High Court at Ernakulam and is of April 2016. So what happened over here was LS Cebu was working as an officer apron in the ground services department of Air India at Thiruvananthapuram, and the ICC of Air India in the southern region received a complaint which was forwarded to it by the airport director. And the complaint was filed by approximately 17 lady employees of the subsidiary of Air India, which is the Air India SAT, a conglomeration of Singapore Air Transport Services, and which is the Air Transport Services, the company offshoot, the subsidiary of Air India Limited. And they conducted an inquiry against the petitioner on the basis of these complaints. Now, what the contention which was raised by LS Cebu was that he was not given a proper opportunity to go through the complaint, to respond to the complaint, to do cross-examination of witnesses. And there was, therefore, because of these violations of these principles of natural justice, the committee's report should be vitiated because it did not give this person adequate opportunity to respond to the complaint. Au contraire, the Air India people, they raised an argument where they said that the inquiry conducted by the committee was a preliminary inquiry. It was to ascertain whether sexual harassment even occurred or not, and it was preliminary report that was submitted by the committee to the company. And they said that once this preliminary inquiry is done, LS Cebu later on will be getting a full-fledged opportunity to present its stance at a later stage before the disciplinary committee, when the disciplinary action will be initiated against LS Cebu. So we see two contentions over here. One is about the principles of natural justice, and the other is about the sexual harassment inquiry of the committee, the internal committee. On these two grounds, the court held, especially on the ground of this issue of contention raised by Air India regarding preliminary inquiry, it said that there is no such thing as preliminary inquiry, and the section, as per section 13, read with section 11, whatever inquiry the committee conducts is a full-fledged inquiry, and it conducts as if it's a disciplinary authority to ascertain whether the incident occurred or not, whether the sexual harassment is proven or not, and then recommend punishment. And if there are service rules in existence, then it recommends action to be taken in accordance with those service rules, as sexual harassment is treated as misconduct under those service rules. And on the grounds of principles of natural justice, as we have seen in various cases that we have gone through before, principles of natural justice are key principles to the conducting of investigation, and they cannot be violated, they cannot be diluted by the committee, because this is the basis of the entire investigation and coming up to the conclusion whether the incident of sexual harassment is proven or not proven. Therefore, any complaint which is filed, the first right of the person is to receive a copy of the complaint, and also to respond to the complaint in an adequate manner, to give its statement in its defense, and also if there are any witnesses, to cross-examine those witnesses, to have the right to receive any other statements which have been filed by the witnesses or the complainant. So these, if these, the Air India people, they said that the people could not come forward and could not come before this person and depose so freely, because they were fearful and of any backlash, or they were fearful of any incident happening later on because of deposing against the person. So in these cases, the High Court held that the principles of natural justice can be molded as per the requirements of the facts and circumstances of the case. And committees, if the people are fearful in coming forward, and if they are intimidated, or if they believe that by them coming forward in person or in front of the person is going to jeopardize them, then the committee can create a mechanism to something that we have seen in previous judgments also, where it can adopt such other measures which can ensure that the witness statements can be taken in properly and shared with the person who has to respond to these statements and provide its own stance. But the fact of the matter remains that a fair opportunity has to be given to a person before they are found guilty, or before they are found to be guilty of committing an offense of sexual harassment. So because of these lapses, because of the misconceived notion of the committee being that it has only a preliminary inquiry, and therefore everything that they need to do is only with regards to the complainant and deposing the witnesses of the complainant, and anything else which follows, anything which will be done later on, and the respondent will be given an opportunity only later on, when the committee has come to a conclusion that sexual harassment has actually happened, was considered to be a wrong approach, was considered to be a violation of the Act and a violation of Section 13, to be precise. If we would see Section 13, subclause 3, subclause 3 talks about when an internal committee or a local committee arrives at a conclusion that allegations against the respondent have been proven, then they shall take action for sexual harassment as misconduct as per the provisions of the service rules applicable to them. And if there are no service rules, then it goes under the rules in which certain punishments, the POSH rules, which provide certain punishments to be given. But it is on the basis of the inquiry where it ascertains that this is sexual harassment and this is misconduct. Pallavi, what are your thoughts on this?
This, I think, I would put it in the category of one, lack of IC's understanding on what exactly the uh, role is, right? That they are required to adhere to, right? A lot of
Right.
internal still do not understand the I think the weight, heaviness, the criticality of what it means to be an equivalent body of a civil court, right? And the kind of rights and powers which are given to them. In the absence of proper internal committee training, it's usually taken as any other misconduct or disciplinary committee, and it's taken as per the whims and fancies of what the committee members believe is right,
Yeah.
right? A lot of organizations, there's this intermediary step that they have added, which is called a fact finding person or a fact finding committee, wherein
Yeah.
once a complaint comes in, they want somebody to first assess whether it is a legit complaint of sexual harassment for the committee to be taken or not, and then they will start their official investigation, right? Without even considering that this step does not exist anywhere in this whole procedure mentioned under POSH Act. So that's what this that's exactly what needs to be understood by the internal committee members, right? That there is a proper guideline which has been given. There are certain steps which needs to be followed. The quorum gets activated, and all these guidelines, including principles of natural justice, get activated uh, from the instance that they receive a complaint, whether it's verbal or whether it's written, and then
Correct.
everything that follows from there has to be in line with what the law under this act is asking them to do, which most of the time gets missed out. Quorums are not maintained, or quorum members will change, timelines will not be adhered to. And as we have been discussing in so many different case laws, there's so many discrepancies that end up happening. So just
No,
capacity
absolutely.
of
Yes.
IC is so crucial.
Absolutely, exactly, and this is what prevents any mishaps from happening in the organization, right? I mean, if this IC was aware about the law properly, it could have conducted and saved so much of time, so much of the company's time and the court's time by making sure that the first inquiry itself, what they were under the assumption was a preliminary inquiry, should have been conducted as a full-fledged inquiry, because you're right. The law does not even distinguish. The law does not even say there is a preliminary inquiry where you ascertain whether the incident happened and then you start the investigation. The investigation is a part of the inquiry, and as soon as you receive the complaint, the clock starts ticking. So if the clock starts ticking, we are supposed to be finishing off an investigation within 90 days period. And the fact that it has been given 90 days period is not just for preliminary inquiry, but for the full-fledged inquiry. So yeah, so I think this is one of the cases which has been referred multiple times, because even till date, a lot of ICs do not understand whether are they supposed to conduct initial inquiry, preliminary inquiry, and then give the opportunity and then start the investigation. Of course, there's always a thing about seeing whether the complaint which comes is not a normal workplace harassment, a complaint and is actually a sexual harassment complaint at the workplace filed by an employee who fits into these four pillars of the sexual harassment law, the workplace, agreed woman, sexual harassment, or is there a hostile working environment or quid pro quo in that. But the preliminary inquiry is no such thing which has been identified under the law.
And also the informality of this whole preliminary inquiry.
Yeah, yeah.
You do not maintain any documentation. You are asking the same questions, right? In one of the cases that we had handled, a committee had completed their fact finding investigation, and they wanted to close that because the fact finding person, the fact checking person, actually concluded after almost a month after receiving the complaint that this is not a legit complaint.
Mm.
Then what happened? The complainant kept insisting that no, this has happened. Okay. And it was a very simple incident. Okay, the person had made a comment in addition to creating hostile environment. The person had made a comment about that you are not wearing a lipstick today. It's good. I like you this way, you know. And this complainant had just recently joined the organization and that team from a different city altogether, and the rest of the team members had been working together for quite a long time. So she was actually having struggle fitting in, and because she has traveled, she has migrated from a different state. In this new state, the whole cultural aspects were anyway new for her, so she was not a very open person from day one. And because of the language difference, the
Right.
rest of the team members also did not create a lot of comfortable environment for her. So in the first 3 months itself, there was a lot of tension between them, wherein the rest of the team members thought she has a lot of attitude because she comes from a big city, and she used to think that people here are very conservative, because even if she will be wearing sleeveless, they will say that her private parts are showing. You know, so comments like that were floating around. And in during this time, the members of the team actually mentioned that, oh, you're not wearing a red lipstick today. I like you this way. So she filed a complaint stating all these things. And the fact finding person went to the respondent and checked that, you know, have you said this? And the respondent, of course, said no, you know. And based on that, the fact finding person spoke to the complainant also. And then the complainant is a little, I would say, emotional as well as aggressive person, easily gets hyped up, you know. And especially when told that we were told that this did not happen and maybe you are lying. And so the thing, she got more flared up. So the fact finding person wanted to conclude it by saying that this did not happen. You know, this seems to be more of a emotional and you know, false complaint, rather than an actual complaint that the committee should take. But during the meeting, when the fact finding person was telling that woman that, you know, this is our conclusion, she kept insisting that no, this has happened, no, this has happened, you should talk to more people, you should do this, you should do that. Suruchi, then they reached out and we started a proper investigation again. Okay, and with proper quorum, because that's when we were roped in. And the first thing that was a little painful to see was that the fact finding person did all these conversations over hours and hours long meetings. And now, through the proper procedure, the same thing will be panned out.
Has to be repeated. Yeah.
Again, have to meet the complainant, and we again have to tell her that, can you explain? Can you tell us this? Can you tell us that? Because the fact finding person never documented anything, right? And eventually, after about a complete, we wanted to fast track the investigation because it's 1 month is already gone and the complainant was already losing their calm. We, at by the end of 1 week investigation, it was concluded the respondent admitted that he had said it. You know, only because there were multiple people during the meeting with the IC who were questioning that person and trying to find loopholes in from his behavior to, you know, what his body language is saying, how much he's fumbling when he's making certain statements, and so on and so forth. He finally admitted that, yes, I said it, but I was not admitting it earlier because I did not want to be labeled as a sexual harasser. So the point is that what is the use of having a fact-finding person?
Yeah.
Right? The whole point of having a committee in place by the law said that there should be at least 3 people out of the 4 and have at least the external member, is because the collective intelligence and wisdom of the team will allow for a better investigation. So that's a real life example, but we know a lot of companies who are still appointing this fact-finding person, but it's not going, it's not valid in the eyes of the law. So
no, correct. And you know, isn't it like going through double trauma, or you know, if the incident has been so grave, you're making the complainant relive through it, and so many times, and it's human, right? How many times am I supposed to repeat the same statement again and again and again? I understand the whole questioning format over here just to find loopholes, but a complainant who has suffered through a grave incident of sexual harassment has come forward, filed a complaint, And first you'll appoint a fact-finding authority who will speak to her or him for hours, and then the committee will come into place and speak to them again for hours. So much of a double living of, the entire incident happens over here.
And it's not saving anybody any time. I mean, a lot
It
of
doesn't. Yes.
that it's saving time of important
Yeah.
people in the company, but it's actually creating more legal loopholes for the whole process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, Kanal Sapori.
Let me just add a point.
Yes.
For a fact, I can mention this, that two of the well-known business groups in the country follow exactly the same process of conducting discrete off-the-record investigation before commencing the formal investigation, including sexual harassment cases. I know this for a fact because I've worked with them, and they fully justify it for whatever reasons. But the important point that I would like to mention here is you compromising on the confidentiality of the reporter here, right? And there is nothing stopping the people that you've spoken to off the record discreetly from spreading the word. So you cannot take because you're talking to them off the record. So if it is off the record, then how do you catch them later if they've compromised the confidentiality?
Correct.
So needs to be.
No, absolutely. That brings in a new angle to it altogether, right? Because as soon as the investigation begins, it's confidential. But if you're doing it off the record, or just to preliminary, taking it a preliminary inquiry, and which is not a part of the entire investigation, then who is to say where the breach will happen, and
Exactly.
how would you prevent such a breach from happening also, because there is no investigation ongoing.
And if I may, with due apologies to both of you, express my view that it is not due to lack of awareness or lack of training. It is just the culture in these organizations. So, thanks.
Right. Every organization.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, Suruchi.
Yeah, sorry. So this was LS Cebu. Yet another interesting case which has come recently on the same section 13(3) is termination as the interpretation of termination as per service rule. And this is a Supreme Court judgment of Dr. Vijay Kumaran versus Central University of Kerala and others. And it's a January 2020 judgment in which what happened was that Dr. Vijay Kumaran was an associate professor in the Department of Hindi at the Central University of Kerala, and was currently, at the time of the incident happening, was on probation. And within a month of his appointment, sexual harassment complaints were filed by, throughout a period of time in which, in totality, there were around 23 female students of his department who had filed a complaint against him. Now, as per the UGC guidelines of 2015, an internal complaints committee was set up to investigate into this matter. And they found this person, Dr. Vijay Kumaran, guilty of all these sexual harassment acts, and recommended an appropriate action to be taken as, as per the rules, the service rules of the university by the Executive Council of the university. Now, this is where we go to the service rules, that what actually was there in the university. So the university has its own set of service rules in which it had categorically stated out that any teacher or an academic staff could be dismissed from service on grounds of misconduct only after a reasonable opportunity has been given to that specific person, and which would mean that once this comes in, that only after a reasonable opportunity has been given, means that there would be an inquiry for this misconduct itself. And however, what happened in this case was, as soon as the Executive Council received this report of the ICC finding this person guilty of sexual harassment, it decided to terminate the services of this appellant over here, Dr. Vijay Kumaran over here, without conducting any separate inquiry. This, of course, was expressed stigmatic order of termination, because we have been terminated for misconduct, and it went to the High Court of Kerala. The single judge over said that no, this is not a stigmatic termination, and it was only a simplistic termination order, because the termination order read that it would the person is terminated based on certain documents. And this view was affirmed by the division bench of the High Court, and subsequently appeal was filed before the Supreme Court. Now, what did the Supreme Court hold over here? And it went into the root of the matter, where to basically see why did the High Court hold that this was not a stigmatic termination but a simpliciter termination. And it said that the tone and the tenor of the order was cannot be simpliciter termination just because it says that the termination is on grounds of certain other documents. And because this was not a case of the court went on to say that this was not a case of mere unsatisfactory academic performance. The other that would have read in the order led to the report of the committee, which was on basis of the investigation done for serious misconduct committed by him, which was the offense of sexual harassment. And therefore, once the sexual harassment has been ascertained by this committee, then they are not the ones, especially when a service rule exists, they are not the ones who pass a simple order of termination. They only say that yes, misconduct of sexual harassment has happened, and the department has to take steps according to the service rules over there. So admittedly over here, there was no doubt that this person, sorry, this slide should not be over here. Over here, there was no doubt that this person had been terminated on grounds of sexual harassment, but had been terminated simply on the report of the IC without the Executive Council doing the proper, complaint, doing the proper mechanism under the disciplinary policy, under the disciplinary mechanism of the service rules. And this over here, it set aside the High Court's order and also the order of termination, which was the 2017 order, and directed this Vijay Kumaran to be reinstated, and left the question of back wages and the departmental inquiry on the authorities itself. So what we see over here, this case to a certain extent was misconstrued and threw some people into a tizzy, thinking that what is the point of a sexual harassment committee then, if they can't pass orders of termination, and then again another inquiry has to happen under the service rules. But this is what the law states. If there are service rules in the organization, then once the committee has done its inquiry, its investigation into the actions, and has found that the case of sexual harassment is proven, and if there are service rules in the organization, its simpliciter states sexual harassment has been proven as the misconduct, and appropriate action to be taken by the management / employer / head of department, whosoever is the ultimate person, as per the service rules of that organization, if they exist. It is only when they don't exist do the committee recommend specific actions which are laid down under the rules itself, which range from warning to censure to demotion to withholding of increments to even termination of employment. So this judgment, this recent judgment of Supreme Court, only solidified the stance that if there are specific service rules in which a person cannot be dismissed from service on grounds of any misconduct by them, then those service rules need to be followed in those cases. So there will be an inquiry by the POSH committee in the IC misconduct, and the disciplinary committee, the inquiry officer, the disciplinary officer under the service rules to take further action on that report. Pallavi, any thoughts or comments over here?
No, Suruchi, I think you covered everything. I have nothing to say on this matter.
Great. So let's move on, and this is something that I think is very deserving of a good conversation, because something that was raised in one of our previous sessions as to how do you identify what's a false complaint and a malicious complaint. And so this is a judgment of 2019 of the High Court of Delhi in the matter of Anita Suresh versus Union of India. Let's go into the facts of the case. Anita Suresh was working as an assistant director with the ESIC in Manesar, Gurgaon in July 2011, and she filed a written complaint on the 8th of July 2011 with the Director General of the ESIC against a person over here who in this matter was respondent number 3. And according to her, respondent number 3 misbehaved with her on 2 instances. One was where she was sitting with certain colleagues of hers on the first floor of the building, and he came and he indicated sexual advances. In her complaint, she mentioned that she cannot bring on record those, on paper, the filthy language that he used against her, or for those sexual advances that he was putting in front of her. The staff and another member, he asked her to come and check the male toilet where nobody was there and he would be following soon. So she repeated these instances in the complaint, and she filed the complaint with the Director General. And the IC was constituted at the ESIC, the Manesar location, and they inquired this complaint, called the respondent for giving the statement and questioning this person. And the person denied that any such thing has happened, and he mentioned that this was a grudge against him due to certain official work being disposed by him in her absence. But the committee examined the petitioner, the respondent, and certain other witnesses also. And it came to the conclusion that this incident of, the 7th July of 2011, which she against which she had filed a complaint on 8th of July, could not be established. But however, the committee gave the benefit of doubt to the parties and relocated them from their present posting. Now, it's important to see what contentions were raised over here, just to understand, and of course, the IC proceedings were analyzed, and certain other things were also analyzed by the court over here to come to a certain conclusion. So what was contended over here? So from the petitioner's side, it was contended that the findings of the committee that the incident could not be established were erroneous and unjustified. And also that according to her, she had given enough evidence to prove that he had misbehaved with her and had made attempts of sexual advances with her. And also, she put forth before the court that she was pressurized at one point of time to withdraw her complaint, and relocating these parties, just to give the benefit of doubt that this could have occurred or this could not have occurred, was unjustified. And the respondent number 3, in fact, during the course of proceedings had superannuated. So she had also pleaded in one of her prayers that retirement benefits be withheld and appropriate action be taken against him. And from the ESIC side, they had said that they had taken into account all the evidences, they had taken into account all the witness statements, and they had transferred them from their postings just to be sure, just to make sure that there's no other hostile working environment. And they also put forth that he had already retired, so no further action can be taken against him. So at this point of time, the court went into the fact as to how did the IC proceedings happen and what went on in these proceedings. And what came out from this analysis of the court was that the petitioner mentioned that these sexual advances had been done before certain colleagues. But when her cross-examination, when her examination in person happened, she could not remember the names of the people who were present at the time of the incident happening, whereas she mentioned that this happened in front of her colleagues. And the second incident where he had told her to go check the male toilet when he would follow soon was also happening in front of certain other people. She said that she had confided into a certain person, Rashmi Kapoor over here, and Rashmi was called as a witness, but she mentioned that she did hear about the incident from the petitioner, but she wasn't present at the incident, so she cannot say for herself. Then certain witnesses who were examined, out of the 8 witnesses that we saw were examined, they mentioned that they were not there. And one person, in fact, who was a witness over here, said that there was no altercation when at the time of the incident, as this person is claiming. And of course, the respondent denied all the allegations. Now, the court went over here and out of the limb said that this appears to be false. This complaint appears to be false, and it actually went on to record to say that it is not believable that the petitioner would not remember the names of any colleague or any staff member, and could not says in her complaint that certain people were present but does not remember any of their names, so that any specific person could become called forward. And the fact that this person said that in her complaint that she doesn't even want to bring on record, doesn't even want to set on paper the filthy language that he used, gives rise to a doubt that it could even have happened, because she did not even disclose it to the committee. So even by not even disclosing it to the committee, it seems that the petitioner appears to have a false or an ulterior motive to file this complaint. And service and went to us to see how good of an officer she has been with the ESIC, where it went to state that she had joined the ESIC sometime in 1997. In 1998, she was issued a charge sheet for negligently serving to firms and ignoring vital information, suppressing certain material information. And for this charge sheet, she was given a penalty of censure because it was her. She had not been in the organization for too long. She was given the benefit of doubt of in case of this penalty. And then again in 2006, she was issued a charge sheet when she was posted in the legal branch as an insurance inspector during 2004, where she had again, according to the court, displayed lack of devotion to the duty and had exhibited gross misconduct when she failed to follow the orders of her superiors. And in that case, in that instance, she had been given reduction of pay for 1 year. And even though she appealed against this penalty, she had failed internally. And this, according to the court, showed that she did not have a clean service record. Therefore, she did not come with clean hands to the court. And therefore, she had, by the way that she could not prove her complaint that there were people present, the court went to say that this was a false complaint and levied a cost on her of 50,000 rupees, which should be deposited with the Delhi High Court, and also told the ESIC to initiate appropriate action against her for filing a false complaint in accordance with the law. Now, if we would go to the section of false or malicious complaint, it says that action can be taken against a person who has maliciously or falsely filed a complaint or has given false evidence on record or malicious evidence on record. But it also goes on to say that the mere inability to substantiate a complaint or provide adequate proof need not attract action against the complainant under this section. Now, this judgment has received a twofold, reaction. One would be, yes, the law should not be misused. That's why if any person who comes forward and says that, oh, this happened in front of people, but cannot prove that or cannot bring forth any witness or cannot recall any names or cannot even say out loud, then how do you believe her? How do you trust her? And how do you, say that she is filing a right complaint with a bona fide intention and not a mala fide intention? However, another set of practitioners and another set gave a reaction that this was just her inability to give names of people, but that does not mean that you could say that it's a false complaint or filed with a malicious intent or filed with an ulterior motive and also penalize her for that. This is something that will dissuade other women from coming forward if they don't even have one shred of proof, or cannot give a concrete evidence or cannot recall certain people who were around them because they may have suffered a shock at that point of time or an initial reaction of being like, oh, what just happened, and they cannot remember other people's name around them and cannot come forward with that. So they will not file actual complaints of sexual harassment whenever they occur. So this case law, why we have brought out today is because this is one of the few cases which has come out in the recent few years where action has been taken against a woman for filing a complaint on the basis that she has filed a complaint on the ulterior motive and cannot prove it, and it's impossible or it's unbelievable to think that she cannot even say the people's name.
And
Pallavi,
yeah, this is what we were talking about this morning also, right?
exactly. Yes.
What do the committees actually go into the whole background of the the character of the complainant in assessing whether the complaint is valid or not? Because character assassination and using that as a basis to justify the findings or the absence of findings is something that exists as part of the legal and the judiciary processes anyway, right? One of the reasons why this law was introduced is that if you go to a police station and you say that somebody was using abusive language around me, they may not take it as seriously. They may not take it seriously at all, because what, you're going to arrest somebody for doing that. But this law allows for a woman to actually go and file a complaint on these, even the most feudal, or the most of the I would say, what's the word for it, that even the most basic,
Irrelevant. Basic.
Simple, the so-called choti batein, small things.
Small things.
It's a small thing. Why are you even bothered about it, right? Just take it and do your work. But I can ignore an incident like this if it's happening with me, let's say, in the bus stand. Every day when I'm going to work and it's happening in the bus stand or it's happening in a market, I can change my route. But if it is happening in a workplace, it is not just a simple incident. It's also not a single incident. It's a repeat. And then it becomes a toxic environment in which I either choose to be part of, somehow I manage to survive in this, or if I want to complain, then I have to have proof in this, right? So I am not so sure, in both, I think you and I have discussed this also, that we are not so sure how this penalty of 50,000, right? If you look at it, it's a big deterrent to bring up. It's not, I mean, a fine like this would have made sense if it were a false complaint, but that was not even proven, right? It's just that there was an absence of any proof around it. And that does not necessarily mean that this was a false complaint. So it's not one of my favorite judgment, to be very honest.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with you, because over here, I feel that the High Court went a bit ahead of its own jurisdiction, and what it should have done, probably, this is like a critique of these judgments also, which is sometimes so important. Maybe it should have done is that, okay, while she has appealed, maybe we will dismiss the appeal and send it back to the IC to see whether anything else can be found, or if it is a false complaint, if they had a hunch that it is a false complaint, then they could have again sent it back and saying that, why don't you inquire whether this is a false complaint? I mean, with just going back into the service record of this person, which had certain, tarnish conduct over here of 1998 and 2006, and the complainant is coming with a complaint in 2011. How can you link those events and, just say that, okay, she does not have a clean service record. She seems to be a nuisance maker. She seems to be a liar over here. She seems to be giving, a false kind of a complaint where she can't even recall any people. I mean, how many times do we recall who is present around us, when something happens to us? So it's possible that it could have been false. It's also possible that it could not have been false. But High Court going over here and giving a clear-cut answer that it is false, and penalizing the person to come forward, was a certain action which I think shouldn't have been done from the High Court itself.
It just puts you two steps back, wherein you have to think twice that do I have the proof? Do I remember the names of the witnesses? Do I have the details of those witnesses? Do I have evidence? Very critical questions for which most of the time you may not even have answers.
Exactly.
And, also, the category of women who are associated with workplaces is very crucial to observe here, right? This law covers women stakeholders, across the length and breadth. Right? It could be somebody who is like you and me. It could be somebody who is above you and me, and it could be somebody who is just starting up in this whole corporate chain. May not even have the language accessibility or tech accessibility, and may not be very street smart, or may not know what and who to complain about these things. And there, at that point in time, if somebody does make the effort and bravery of bringing out a complaint, this judgment sets as a huge deterrent that you have to be ready with everything in order to prove yourself. So that's where I think we are on this particular judgment.
Yeah.
If I may just add a point.
Yes,
Sure.
Dilip.
Exactly my thoughts on both the points. So unless the witnesses, and if these witnesses were women employees who confirmed that she was making a false allegation, I think the court went overboard in calling this a false allegation. Unless there were several women employees saying that this is a false allegation, number one. Uh, Importantly, I think the court judgment has made this woman employee vulnerable to sexual harassment in future. Thanks.
Yeah.
It's easier for somebody to harass her in future based on this, because when you know, opening her past record of having which is more based on performance rather than behavioral
Correct.
issues. So just because a performance is not up to the mark does not substantiate a false allegation today. They're two different things altogether. So it's making her vulnerable in future. I would look at it that way. Thanks.
No, absolutely. And I think we've seen in a couple of other cases where court took so much of a different stance. I think this was M. Rajendran's case versus Daisy Rani, which we had seen in one of our previous sessions, in which also the complainant concerned, the lady officer concerned, had a certain misconduct proceeding, had a certain performance related issue, and other issue, disciplinary proceeding already going on. And she had filed a sexual harassment complaint against one of the head of the departments. So in that, the court did say that, because an argument was raised that this sexual harassment proceedings is like a counter attack on me, a counter claim by this lady to put the disciplinary proceedings, the real issue over here, under the rug. And, over here, the court went that no, that is separate. That does not concern the sexual harassment, issue over here. If the sexual harassment has happened and if the committee has come to the conclusion, then it is a completely separate proceeding overall. But over here, we saw Delhi High Court doing such a, backflip, where it has taken the progression which has come in this law, taken it a step back. At least I'm sure there will be people probably differing with us over here also. And they are entitled to their opinions, but my opinion over here would be that this was a retrograde step, a regressive step by the High Court over here for punishing somebody who's come forward with a complaint. Okay, so this brings us to the end of our session today over here. I don't think we've answered all questions. Pallavi, any last questions, any last thoughts? Colonel Puri, do you have any other question, any other thoughts over here?
No, but a lot of things need to be considered by the committee as well as especially the High Court, and I mean, there are more questions than answers being given by the High Court decision. So, I mean, I can go on and ask.
Yeah.
I think if we agree that this is one of those exceptional case studies of a High Court decision, which is not acceptable to at least some of us, I think that should suffice. Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, I think courts are always mixed bag, right? Sometimes you get a good judgment out of them, which you want to keep on talking about and want to keep promoting because it's such a good judgment. And then there comes a judgment which you're like, why did the court behave this way or give a judgment like this way? At the end of the day, the judges over there are also human with their own, perceptions about the law, perceptions about the human behavior.
Very
So,
strong cognitive bias, element of cognitive bias in this judgment.
Yeah, I would agree so too.
Just not
Yes.
done.
And I like what you said and completely agree with you on this one, that these are judgments at the end of the day, right? And while for some situations, and everybody is bound to use them, everyone is going to use and refer
Yeah.
to judgments to support the thought process that they are adopting. And this one will work for certain ICs and certain professionals.
Yeah.
When the approach and attitude is purely based on evidence, right? That if there is an evidence, then it must have happened. If there's no evidence, and you also have a past record which is not very much aligned with the value system and so many other things, then it may take a negative approach. So that's the only thing that I wanted to say also.
Yeah.
But hey, this is the first judgment that we have covered that we didn't like.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that element over here also. I mean, we've been covering all really nice judgments, so maybe one of them should be which we don't like and want to critique about.
No, there are many judgments of high courts and Supreme Courts that we don't like, but sure.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
No, great then. So I believe this is it for today then, Suruchi.
Yeah. Yes,
Thank
I think let's.
you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you, Colonel Sapori. Thank you, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.